if we take a look at the whole story of Moshe and the people coming out of Egypt and the 40 years in the desert, the whole thing begins to take on a whole new light. If you read the story just simply, it sounds like Moshe was a great guy. Very devoted, very sincere, and the people were a bunch of nudniks who just couldn't get it straight, didn't appreciate him, so on and so forth. Which isn't much of a story for Torah to be telling us. Now it takes on a whole new meaning. When Moshe came along and performed miracles, the Jews found it interesting. But that didn't mean they were going to drop everything and run after him. It's a great compliment to the Jewish people, not a criticism. And that's why when the Jews made the golden calf, Moshe argues in favor of the Jews, and he says, don't be angry with them and don't punish them because they're a stiff-necked people. Now, what kind of defense is that? Moshe was arguing in favor of the Jew by saying they are a stiff-necked people. And that's to their favor. Because other people would have followed and would have obeyed, but for all the wrong reasons. It would have become a personality cult. But when Moshe came along and brought 10 plagues on the Egyptians and split the sea and brought food from heaven and water from a rock, the Jews said, that's nice. So what else? Good for you. You're a talented man, but what does that got to do with me? So, on a deeper level, when the Jews questioned Moshe, it wasn't that they were merely ingrateful nudniks. They wanted to make sure that what Moshe was showing them and what Moshe was offering them was not his greatness, but something between them and God. And that's why God says, I think in the Tehillim, that the Jews tested God 10 times. I mean, they tested God? Where did they test God? When they questioned Moshe. Questioning Moshe was testing God. How so? By questioning Moshe, they meant to say, I know you're a great guy, and you can do all sorts of things, but has this anything to do with God? So it's not that they doubted God. They tested God, meaning to say they probed to find the godliness in Moshe's miracles. Because they weren't impressed with the fact that he could do a miracle. They wanted to know, does this miracle convey some kind of a message between God and us? Or is this just you doing it? And if it's just you doing it, applause. You're great. But doesn't mean I have to devote my life to you. I want to know what God wants of me. So that's a great compliment to the Jewish people that we saw the true message. We didn't get distracted by the glitter of the personality. If the struggle is between two inclinations, then miracles would not have produced good results. You're tempted to commit adultery. Some guy comes along and splits the sea, and you say, oh, in that case, I guess I won't commit adultery. Why not? Because you got distracted? That's not a moral accomplishment. Like, oh, splitting seas is even more interesting than adultery. I think I'll stay and watch this instead. That's not a moral achievement. But because the struggle is not between doing the sin and not doing the sin, the struggle is between being confused or fooled by what appears to be true versus seeing the truth as it is. Here, miracles are very useful because a miracle means breaking the habit of nature. And when you break the habit of nature, then you see beyond nature. Then you're in touch with reality. And that's what happens when a person sees a miracle. It's not that he's overwhelmed by the fact that a miracle can happen. It says that Amalek is the worst of all the unholy peoples, because when the Jews came out of Egypt, all the nations were terrified of the Jews until Amalek came along and attacked them. And although he got beaten, but it broke the spell. The Jews were not invulnerable. You can attack them. You'll get beaten, but it's not out of the question anymore, right? So the Torah says that Amalek's evil, Amalek's sin, was that he cooled the feelings that existed at that time. Feelings of the other nations, the awe that the other nations had for the Jews, Amalek cooled it off. Chassidus says that Amalek did worse than that. Amalek cooled the enthusiasm of the Jew. That was his attack on Judaism. Amalek came along and said to the Jews who were very inspired by the splitting of the sea, Amalek came along and said, "What are you so excited about? What are you so excited about? God split a sea? This is to you exciting? God created the sea out of nothing. So what's the big deal if he splits it? It's no big deal for God to split a sea. What are you getting so excited about?" And that cooled the enthusiasm that the Jews had for godliness as a result of the splitting of the sea. And that's why Amalek is so evil, because he takes all the enthusiasm out of. So when we were learning this, our teacher said, after we learned it, and we were all, yeah, Amalek is terrible. So our teacher said, wait a minute, isn't he right? What's wrong with that argument? He's got a good argument. Why should we get excited about the fact that God split the sea? What's the big deal? A person gets excited. He went into the hospital and the doctors told him that he had no chance whatsoever for recovery. And a miracle happened and he's healthy. And because of that, the person decided that from now on they're going to be observant and they're going to keep Shabbos. What are you getting so excited about? Because the doctor said I was going to die. And I didn't die, so God saved me. I mean, God saved you. God created you in the first place. And it was God who made you sick in the first place. And then God decided that, well, okay, so you won't die. So what's the big deal? What are you excited about? That God healed you even though you were seriously sick. He made you seriously sick. In fact, he made you in the first place. And what's the big deal for God to cure somebody? Amalek was devious. He knew that the excitement was not over the fact that God could perform a miracle. He knew that wasn't what would, and yet he interjected that as a distraction, as if saying, you are excited over the fact that God could perform a miracle, don't be. And he's right. Don't be. But that's not what the excitement was. The excitement of a miracle is not that God could do great things. A miracle means that nature, with all of its impressive, convincing power, has been lifted, and you got a glimpse of something beyond nature. That's why you're inspired. Not because you're impressed with how God can do great things, but that generally we function under the yoke of nature. When a doctor says this is an incurable disease, then you die. Because you believe it. Because it's an incurable disease. When a miracle happens and you don't die from an incurable disease, then you realize not that God is powerful, but that God is real. That's the inspiration. It's not nature that runs the world. God runs the world. Is it a big deal for him to run the world? No. But that's not the point. The question isn't whether it takes a lot of effort on God's part to run the world. The point is that when I experience the fact that he runs the world, that is inspiring. Because then I'm in touch with him. Then my godly soul is released. And then I start thinking like a godly soul. And I start feeling like a godly soul. Because I am a godly soul. Except that nature oppresses that with its repetition. Every morning the sun comes up. That's terrible. Because that pounds away at the godly instinct. And says, what do you mean God created the world? The sun just keeps coming up. The doctor who says this is an incurable disease, how does he know it's incurable? Because 100 people who have come down with this disease, every one of them died. So 100 times pounds away at you. First guy died, the second guy died, the third guy died. This repetition is very oppressive. It's like propaganda. If you hear it often enough, it becomes your reality. And nature is the worst kind of propaganda. So when people say, of course the sun will come up tomorrow, there's no logic to that whatsoever. Then why do they believe it? Propaganda. There is no reason for the sun to come up tomorrow. None. No scientific reason, no natural reason, none whatsoever. Other than the fact that it came up yesterday. That's called propaganda. You believe something to be true simply because you've heard it so many times. Because it's been repeated so often. We take nature to be true simply because it's repetitious. So when we see a miracle, we break out of that yoke. We break out of that force of habit. And then our godly soul takes over. So see, there is another reality. But if we didn't have a godly soul, and some guy came along and performed a miracle, we wouldn't be inspired. We would simply be overwhelmed and impressed by the guy. That's the difference between a true prophet and a false prophet. A true prophet puts you in touch with God. A false prophet impresses you. You go visit a holy man, and you come away and you say, "Oy, is he holy? Oy, did I see a holy man? Can't believe it. He's so holy." It's a false prophet. If you go to see a holy man and you come back and you say, I think from now on, I can't eat non-kosher food anymore. That's a holy man. But if you come away and you say, you should have seen how he does this, he does that, and he knows everything and he can see everything, but you're not going to keep Shabbos? You're not going to keep kosher? Wasn't a holy man. Was Hillel a prophet? Was Rabbi Akiva a prophet? They did have Ruach HaKodesh. They were guided by, their instincts were holy. Some say that that's greater than prophecy. Because a prophet means that when God comes and talks to you, then you hear, then you're in touch with what God wants. But otherwise, you're not. Whereas the person who has this divine instinct is always in touch with God. Us. Yeah, that's exactly true. That's why I say that the test or the proof is if you keep Shabbos or kosher. But if you give tzedakah, it doesn't prove anything.
Because keeping Shabbos and kosher is a commitment.
Because you don't keep Shabbos as a result of being in a good mood. You'll give tzedakah because you're in a good mood. In other words, an expansive mood or a peaceful mood or a serene mood will make you more generous, more tolerant, more patient, more giving. It won't make you keep Shabbos. Because what's that got to do with anything? Unless you're in touch with what God wants, because that's all Shabbos is. It's not goodness of your heart. No matter how good your heart feels, you'd never think of keeping Shabbos.